Busy weekend for Mr. Sal Capaccio. I got an idea to make him judge and jury here on a quick little side mission. Good morning, Sal.
Good morning. How are you?
We're all right. Sal, I don't know if you remember or you heard this. Joe and I had a bet going into the draft. What do they take first, linebacker or running back? And they didn't take either. So it's a wash, but I wonder if you will declare a tiebreaker here. I'm looking at the UDFAs they brought in. They brought in a linebacker. They did not bring in a running back. I win.
I don't think it.
Undrafted. Come on.
The bet was who's
What
drafted.
is the draft? What was the bet? Was the bet draft or was the bet just add to the roster?
The exact letter.
What if they would have signed a free agent?
They did. They just signed a linebacker free agent.
But
what if they would have traded for somebody? Would that have counted?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, right. Like it was. What do they bring in first, linebacker or running back? I was on linebacker. He was on running back.
I think it says, what will the Bills draft earlier? UDFA stands for undrafted.
You know what? I think it goes to next year. Let's do it.
Actually, I think.
Let's go to next year.
Do we just leave it up there for the next year?
Yeah, it's up for a year. All right.
All right.
Good morning, Sal. Happy post-draft day. Big weekend, busy weekend, of course. You down there at One Bills Drive and everything going on. Hectic weekend.
Yeah.
And, the story of the draft is, of course, that the Bills, and it kind of fits in with their offseason, it's a fully rebuilt defense, really, here, right? Just the sheer numbers that they've added to their defense, they've locked in some cornerstone pieces, and the front seven gets a big-time overhaul here.
Yeah, I wrote an article at WGR550.com, and the way I started it was like Oprah handing out cars. Brandon Beane handing defensive players to his defensive coaching staff. You get a defender, and you get a defender, and you get a defender, right? And really, at the end of the day, I mean, it really was mostly, though, defensive line and corner, right? And then you do have a player that can play safety. He's more of a corner, but we'll see. I mean, he might play safety. It wasn't anything like he's coming in. We had that big safety discussion. That never happened. They didn't try to replace what they have there. We had the wide receiver discussion. That never happened. They didn't try to replace what they have there. This was a clear focus by Brandon Beane. Ever since the beginning of the offseason, we have been kind of told that they were going to concentrate heavily on defense. I think maybe even to the surprise of me, 6 out of the first 7 players go on the defensive side of the ball. But I think this was a clear message by Brandon Beane. Listening to him after the draft, even talk about what was his quote? His quote was, I didn't feel the offense was what held us back in the playoffs, essentially, or in games, right? I mean, it's a pretty interesting quote when it comes time to analyze everything, and that's why they went defensive heavy.
So they go defensive heavy for Sean McDermott's defense and Bobby Babbich's defense. So let's go through the picks. We'll real quickly recapping Max Hairston, what they like from him for the first round. And then we'll go on to day 2, where they go defensive lineman twice, which is something you'd been saying for a while, like corner and 2 defensive linemen in the first 3 picks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have. For about a month, I've been saying 2 defensive linemen and a corner. I didn't know what order. And to be quite honest with you, I was a bit surprised because I had the Bills drafting the defensive lineman first. But that being said, you don't know what their board looks like, and they wind up going with the corner first. I was confident that they would go 2 defensive linemen and a corner, but not necessarily the order. And really, Jeremy, I think that Maxwell Harrison's a really interesting pick for me when I go back and think about it, because we've talked about how he's not the specific mold of what the Bills normally have at the position. They like to have a guy who could be a little more physical, hold up against the run. That's not really what he is. Brandon Beane, though, said it's not for lack of effort. He's a little bit smaller. He'll get better at that. They'll do that. So I understand that part of it. You know what 2 words come to mind, though, for this draft for me, and I think it really goes to him here a lot. Fit and swing. I think the Bills drafted guys that fit. I'm not going to say need. Yes, need is run. I don't want to use that word, though. The word I want to use is fit. These guys fit what the Bills do, and or they're big swings. I think Maxwell Harrison is a swing. I think this kid could be, like, his ceiling is really, really high. But I also wonder, like, is he going to be able to stay on the field and play and do what they need him to do and in critical moments, because teams are going to try and, bully him a little bit. Like, this is really fascinating for me to see where this goes. So really interesting for him. I think he's a big swing. I'm not saying it's bad or good. I think it's a really interesting pick because I think there's a wide range of outcomes here for him. I think with TJ Sanders in the second round, When I talk about fit, this is a player a lot of people mock to the Bills. He just fits what they do. He's the type of player that they usually bring in here on the defensive line. And the same thing with Landon Jackson. I mean, if you looked up like prototypical guy the Bills love and want to have on their defensive line, there's a picture of Landon Jackson, right? I mean, how many people said this is a guy that truly fits the Buffalo Bills? He has a body just like Greg Rousseau, and he has a motor, and he is super intelligent, and he's a guy to me that is going to play in this league a long time. And I do think he has a really high ceiling, but at the very least, I think he has a super high floor.
Another word I've seen used this weekend, Sal, is their defense was looking for juice.
Yeah, it's good. I like it. And that goes back to, I'll say swing. Juice is a good word, and that's what it is. I mean, they drafted guys. We know they like traits, and they've gone with traits before with guys like Tremaine Edmonds, and we could say however that turned out. I mean, maybe didn't translate to the exact, production everybody hoped for, but Tremaine was a good player for them. He signed a really big contract in free agency. That tells you that. They've mostly gone for traits, though. Greg Rousseau is a traits guy like that. But on the offensive side, of course, Josh Allen with the traits, and Spencer Brown with traits, and even Tommy Doyle is no longer on the team. But he was that athletic freak. Chase Lunt, an athletic freak of an offensive lineman. They like guys like that, right? This is, on the defensive side, them doing that in a number of different ways. And the juice is certainly there with guys like Max Hairston, guys like Landon Jackson. I think Deion Walker has a lot of juice. Very interesting pick. He's a super big guy who you say, and I wrote as soon as they drafted him, there's your one technique. That's because of the size he has. He's going to play some one technique. But really at Kentucky, he moved all around. And this is a 334-pound man who is very athletic and moved around. And I'm interested to see how the Bills use him. He's got to play a little lower if they're going to play him at the one technique. But part of the reason that he wasn't playing as low last year is the back injury that they really didn't know he was really suffering from until later in the year. And, you listen to Brandon Beane, he said, if it wasn't for that and the way he played last year, because of that, he might have been a first or second round pick after 2023.
Yeah. Walker and Sanders, if I almost pair them together here, Sal, because Walker, like the comparison I've seen the most for him is actually Jordan Phillips. In fact, I think someone brought that up in the press conference with Beane, that Phillips is a comparison for him because of his pass rush ability. And it's different body types, but does it feel like now at that position the Bills have, maybe Oliver would be the one just because of his size, like you would never want to put him, I think, at one technique, but otherwise Beane's talked about Sanders can do both and Walker can do both, and even though they're different body types, I feel like the Bills were going for a certain versatility at that position.
Which they really love, right, Joe? We know that. I mean, Bills love versatility. The guys that can play one tech, three tech, guys that can play outside corner and have some flexibility to play nickel. We saw that with some of the draft picks. They love their versatility in the offensive line. We know that as well. So yeah, you're right. That's typically right. And even the guy I had them mock to take, Tyleek Williams, like he would be a one technique, but he would be able to play both spots. I just think that that's the nature of football, though. Now it's not unique to the Bills, right? I mean, you watch teams and you watch college football now. So many of these pass rush packages these teams have. You don't get these. Austin Collins, the kid from Florida, right, who's this monstrous 400-pounder. You don't get guys just like that all the time anymore. It's mostly guys who, yes, they have these different bodies types and they can basically, go and play all along the defensive line.
Those linemen, because Harrison, I think everyone knows, like he'll compete for a job with Trey White and all the other corners that they brought in. Like there's a path for him to play. Do you see a clear path for all three of those defensive linemen between rounds 2 and 4 to play meaningful snaps this season?
Yeah, by the way, I said Austin. I think it's Alfred Collins, right?
Yeah,
Alfred Collins, right.
Yeah, Alfred Collins, sorry. Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, like, you look at the numbers. I think that, right, what our job is to project here, right? It's my job, it's your job. We talk about, but there's so much time between now and then. And there's got to be a lot of stuff that's got to get sorted out. We know Larry Ogunjobi has a 6-game suspension. Let's just take the defensive tackle group for a second. Take Larry Ogunjobi out. You only have 6 guys there now. Zion Logue is your 7th, but let's just, I think Zion Logue is probably more of a long shot because you have 2 drafted guys all within the first 4 rounds. They're making the team. It'd be a stunner if Walker or Sanders didn't make the team, obviously. That's going to happen. And then you have Oliver, Jones, and Carter. That's 5 guys right there. Now, it is possible a guy like Deion Walker, at the end of training camp, the Bills said they're going to take him slow. You could put a guy now, you don't have to do the parking lot cut. You could put a guy on short-term IR on that last day. Maybe he doesn't get fully back to where you want him. Brandon Beane said, that, they're going to take it slow with him, but he could play a game right now, but they're going to take it slow with him. Does that indicate that maybe once you get through training camp, does that mean he's automatically on the team, or is there another spot now with the new rules, the way you could do that? So I just think about things like that. That being said, Joe, there's spots here for guys to play. The Bills, they rotate 4 defensive linemen, 4 defensive tackles, and sometimes 5. So I see a lot of opportunity here for guys to be able to come in and play. And then you got to figure out what happens when Ogunjobi comes back, but that's 6 weeks down the road, and a lot can happen between now and then.
Right, a lot of opportunity here for some of the young guys. Sal, later in the draft, they turn to big blocking tight end and offensive line, and even the receiver to this point. Special teams, right? There's going to be opportunity on special teams, and it looked like the second half of the draft, or the third of the draft, was about focusing in on that part of the roster.
Yeah, I agree, Jeremy. I'm going to say this, though. I'm going to make a prediction right now that, I think could very well happen. I think Jackson Hawes could be your new extra offensive lineman in place of Alec Anderson. And then you have a guy that actually can go out for a pass once in a while. This guy is a mean, violent human being on the football field. Not off the field. He's got an economics degree from Yale, by the way, okay? He's a super smart guy. But he talks about how he loves the violent part of football, wants to put his face mask underneath someone's chin strap and just drill them into the ground. This is a guy that can go out and he is your young Lee Smith, right? You know what I mean? Like a guy that could you're going to put him out there and say, just go block that guy and help us. And what did the Bills do? A ton of, more than any team in the league last year. Extra offensive lineman. And now that extra offensive lineman can actually be somebody who you can go out and leak out for a pass because everybody thinks he's going to come in and block. And then what happens to Alec Anderson? Alec Anderson fights for a job. Alec Anderson fights for a backup role that he's a main backup, and you could still use him in versatile ways. Maybe even fights for a starter. Not that they're looking to move on from, it would basically be David Edwards would be the most likely candidate he could compete with there. But I think Jackson Hawes is here not just for special teams. I think Jackson Hawes is going to be the team's extra offensive lineman.
The report on him is he is pretty much consensus the best blocking tight end in the draft.
Yep.
Like, he's not. I don't know who second place is, but everyone agrees that's what this guy does.
And he'll also be 25 during the season, so this is not like a developmental player, I don't think, for the long term.
Right. Like I said, he's had 5 years at Yale before transferring to Georgia Tech for a year, right? So he's been in college football for 6 years. Chase Lunt is one of these traits guys. He's 6'7", super athletic tight end. I think there's belief in the building that he could very well compete for one of the backup jobs. The Bills have all 10 of their main starting offensive linemen returning. But if you go beyond the top starting 5, Dawkins, Brown, McGovern, Torrance, and Edwards, you go beyond them, you have Alec Anderson, we just talked about, Tylon Grable, Ryan Vandermark, Cedric Van Pran Granger, and Richard Garage. I think he's absolutely in the mix to compete with one of those guys for a job on the actual 53-man roster. And then you get to the final pick of their draft, Caden Prather. Yeah, wide receiver finally comes in the form of a 7th-round pick. That's a special teams guy. If he's going to make the team, he's got to play special teams. Like, that's a 5th receiver who's got to play special teams, who does have a little bit of juice. He's a bigger guy that can move. He's got 4.4 speed, and his size, there's always a spot in the NFL to try, at least, to see if you can make it work with a guy who can run 4.4 at 6'2", 6'3".
The other day 3 pick, Sal, they had 2 more corners, although being described, Jordan Hancock is more of a nickel and maybe also a safety, which kind of sounded like maybe a little bit of what Cam Lewis does, but in a different body type. So I saw that and pair that with, obviously, Hairston in round 1. And do you feel like corner, as we get closer to training camp, and then once we're in training camp, both at the top and the bottom, is going to end up being like the most competitive position? Because there are names there, veteran names. There are draft picks now, and like I'm looking at your chart for there's 76 players right now, and looking at corner. I see like 8 names at that position alone, not even including Lewis, because he's listed at safety, that all might have a case to make the team right now.
Yeah, there's 10 names, and then Lewis is 11, right? And he's your main backup nickel. He's listed as a safety because that's where he's listed on the roster and what he plays as well. Taron Johnson, Christian Benford, Max Hairston. I think right now they'd probably be the most, Johnson and Benford are going to start. You'd probably say, okay, you think Hairston's going to win the job. He's the first-round pick. Doesn't have to be, though. He's going to be competing with Tre'Davious White, Dane Jackson, Jamarcus Ingram is in the mix, obviously. And now you bring in Jordan Hancock and Dorian Strong. Oh, by the way, We know the Bills love to develop guys and say, give them a shot. That's what's happened with Jamarcus Ingram. That's what's happened with Cam Lewis. And here's Daquan Hardy, who last year was close to winning the return man job, and he actually played pretty well and was not even just a nickel guy. He actually played some outside in training camp. Here's to Corey Couch, who played a little bit in the nickel last year during training camp. This is going to be super competitive. I agree with you. We'll see where it goes. I'm interested in the Jordan Hancock pick for what you said, Joe. He does seem just like a Cam Lewis player. Is it a Cam Lewis replacement? I wouldn't go that far. What I would say is maybe then you have an opportunity for Cam Lewis and Jordan Hancock to one be the backup nickel, the other be a backup safety. So that Cam Lewis doesn't have to do everything, if that makes sense, right? And you have room for that because now you can, maybe someone gets pushed off the roster. Is that where DeMar Hamlin now, he has to fight and say, okay, we know it's not for sure that he would make the roster. Maybe your safeties are Rapp, Bishop, Derek Forrest, and Cam Lewis, and then your backup nickel is Hancock, or maybe another safety is Hancock, and your backup nickel is still Cam Lewis. I think there's ways for this to sort out. Of course, you'll get into training camp and you'll see how this all goes. It's super interesting to me. And then I do think that because Hancock has some safety flexibility, that is, notable because we did talk a lot about safety. They're very comfortable, as I said, guys, with what they have in Rapp and Bishop, but it is another guy that they can add to the mix.
Sal Capaccio. Sal, obviously, the thing we've not yet gotten to is the lack of receiver. 7th round pick is just, like you said, throwing something at special teams. First question is, would you expect them to add somebody? Is Amari Cooper on the radar? Is Elijah Moore on the radar? Because, say what you will about receiver, 2 guys left and 1 came in. So they're down from last year's numbers, regardless of how you felt about last year's team, where Jalen Virgil or Tyrell Shavers here or Laviska Shenault are elevated into the Mac Hollins role if Palmer takes over the Cooper role. Do you think they will add somebody at this point?
Well, reportedly, they have 3 undrafted free agents also joining this group. So that would be, 12 total? I think they have 9 right now. Mm-hmm. That would be 12. I think they generally bring 13, 14 to camp. So you could say there might be a spot for somebody. Guys, I'm going to be super honest with you. I don't see anybody that has, a name like that adding right now. Could it happen in the future? Yes. I mean, I was told a long time ago, and it always resonated with me, that veterans like that, veterans you're talking about, Amari Cooper, there's a Keenan Allen out there, Elijah Moore, right? Guys like that, they're going to keep themselves in shape. They're going to be ready. So if you need to call on them, you can call on them. They're going to come in. They've played in multiple systems. You don't have to bring them in right away. You're going to have Brandon Beane on in a little while. I'm sure you're going to talk about this. Here's my read of it, though, and what I would say. I think the Bills, as we've talked about, for right or wrong, people can say that this shouldn't be the way they approach it. I think the Bills are very comfortable with what they have right now, but it's a wait-and-see approach, and that wait-and-see is going to be, let's make sure we're comfortable with it. Let's not bring in somebody now to take away from snaps and opportunity and development through the summer for, let's see, whoever you want to say, even Keon Coleman and Joshua Palmer working with Josh Allen and Curtis Samuel getting more reps and Tyrell Shavers, all those guys. But if we're not comfortable in 2 months from now and we need somebody at training camp, we feel we don't have enough, we can turn to a veteran. That's the way I read it. So, yes, do I think they're going to add, Jeremy? Probably 1 or 2, but maybe not now after the UDFAs. I don't think it closes the door on doing it eventually for a guy that maybe people are thinking about.
Well, last year they added MVS and Claypool, and there were all these buy low, maybe they'll pop ideas. And, Sal, they don't even have that guy right now, unless you're talking UDFAs, which to me is not a realistic conversation. I mean, it's puzzling. I get it. They had a good offense last year, but for a couple of years, it's not even about the players they've had. Even when Diggs was on the team, they were light at the position. They are thin again. And that's where I wonder, like a Cooper or an Elijah Moore or someone like that, because you just went how many defensive backs deep? And at receiver, you get to like the 4th receiver, and it is troublesome.
Well, to your point, and this is timing, right, Sal? Because a lot of why Cooper, I brought this up earlier, Cooper and Allen, a couple of the names you mentioned. Maybe part of the reason they haven't signed yet is they want to see what teams do first. Like, let me pick out a team that maybe didn't get what they wanted in the draft, and I'll go have my agent call them. Because last year, right, the Bills had a couple of veterans. When did they sign Chase Claypool? On May 3rd. When did they sign MVS? They signed him on May 14th. So it almost feels like those low-level veteran signings where they'll compete for a spot in camp, that kind of gets going now, I feel like, or in the next month.
And you bring up a good point, Joe. both sides have to agree, right? It's not just the Bills saying, I want to bring this guy in. If you're one of these guys we're all talking about, you look at the roster and you say, what's really my opportunity there? Look, let's see where the Bills are. Now, you could feel, I can definitely beat these guys out. That's right. But you have to think about, as I always say, what do the Bills feel about it? I don't think the Bills feel that they could bring somebody in right now that's going to just be over, one of their top 4 receivers. So I think the Bills probably feel, okay, let's see where this goes. And if we need to go out and get somebody, I think this comes down to another point here, guys, right? And I know this might be a little bit pie in the sky asking, because you're like, okay, well, what are the chances of that? I think a lot of this comes down to the Bills really expect a big jump, from last year from Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid and Curtis Samuel, all in health and production, right? Health and production. I think a lot of this comes down to what they feel the projection is from last year to this year for those guys, both in health and production. And again, that's 3 guys, right? What are the chances they're all going to be making a jump and staying healthy and being more productive? But even if you get 2 out of the 3, I think they kind of get them to where they think that they can be. Well,
the question for Bean, what we're going to have next segment is, relative to their peers, they do not invest in the position, period. Right? Mm-hmm. Would you even dispute that? That relative to their peers, you had teams with full receiver rooms that love the guys, that think the next guy's going to pop, and they drafted him anyway. So whether it's a decision or if it's just, Bean kind of said the way the board fell, it was never really there for them, where the top guy was a receiver on the board. So to me, it looks like relative to the league, they undervalue it as much as anybody.
I would say it does look like that for sure, and I'm interested in his response. I paused because I'm thinking, what is Brandon Bean going to say?
Right.
He's probably going to tell you how they're second in the league in points scored. They set a franchise record and had the league MVP at quarterback.
That's right. That's not the answer to the question, though. That's a different answer to to a direct question. So we'll see what he has to say.
I get it, and I get it. I understand. To wrap up, though, this discussion of receivers, I know you guys got to go to Brandon. I wouldn't close the door on somebody later on, but I think this is the group they're going to roll with and see what they have here for a couple months.
All right. Thank you, Sal.
You got it, guys.
Northtown Automotive Extra Point Show coming up.